Hello, and if only I had an audience to say hello back or to say get out of here, you slime, whatever. Let me adjust the lighting. Thoroughly amateur, and it shows. I'm Robert McKay. I'm doing this channel, and this video is going to be a review of Rebel 100 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Don't you love the lighting that makes it so hard to read the label? Maybe one of these days when I'm rich and famous, and I'm working on a system to win the lottery without buying a ticket. I have perfected everything except the part about not buying a ticket. That still stymies me. But when I do, I'll be able to buy proper production facilities. In the meantime, you just got to deal with a label that's hard to read. This is Rebel 100 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It's a wheated bourbon, and most bourbon uses corn, rye, and a little malted barley, and the rye is what they call a flavoring grain. It adds some flavor that the corn and the barley don't provide. A wheated bourbon, instead of rye, uses wheat, and so you don't get the spice of the rye. You get a little bit more gentle, mellow flavor, and I'm finding that I like both about equally. But it is a straight bourbon whiskey. There is no age statement on the label that I can find, which means that it is at least 4 years old, because on a straight bourbon or a straight whiskey of any kind in the United States, if it's between 2 and 4 years, it has to have an age statement. So if there's no age statement and it is a straight whiskey, then it's at least 4 years old. I'm not going to pour much of it because this is just a review. As soon as I pop the cork, I can get a little of the smell of it. One of these days I'll have a setup where I can set the bottle down and you can see it while I'm doing other things. And something happened on my phone in the background. You may have heard it. And it's a nice, I love my setup. It's a nice golden color. I don't know how much you can see there. Swirl it around in the glass, and that does a couple of things. It coats the side of the glass so I can look at the legs, and I'm not going to worry about that right now. It's something I like to do, and the viscosity of the whiskey can show in the legs. Viscosity is nice. You don't want something watery in your mouth. It also, swirling the glass, and I found if I hold it like this rather than like this, it swirls better, and because it's just my thumb and 2 fingers, it's not going to unduly warm the whiskey. This also agitates the whiskey and gets the fumes coming up and through the shape of the Glencairn concentrating, so that when you nose it, you can get a better idea of what it is. This is because it's Rebel 100, or the name Rebel 100 means it's 100 proof. Half of what you see here is alcohol. That's what 100 proof means. And I've been doing this a short enough time, a year and a half or so. It still amazes me that half of this is alcohol. Well, let's see what it will. You can't, you're not here, but I'm going to see what it smells like. And immediately there's honey, something else in there, corn maybe. Of course, I'm getting the alcohol on, especially in this right nostril, which doesn't detect much else. Yeah, there's mustiness in there, some kind of musty corn. And a sweetness. Of course, there's honey, but there's something else. Some kind of syrup, maybe. And there's a note that I can't identify. It's got some of that mustiness and it's got some of that sweetness, but I can't differentiate it out. And Sometimes that happens. I've even seen people like Fred Minnick, who's an international bourbon expert, recognized expert in bourbon, come across a note that they can't different, or that he can't figure out, at least not immediately. A little bit of grass in there, and I've learned to tolerate some grass, but I don't really care for it. There's a dustiness. It makes me think of a corn crib, where you're storing the corn, and of course dust can settle on it and whatnot. And there's something else, but I can't make out what that other note is, so I'll have a sip. Honey and spice and corn in there, cornmeal, I think it is. And in a way, I hate doing these review videos because in the nature of things, I have to do them whenever I have a chance. My wife and I have to work around each other because we live in a one-bedroom apartment. I don't want to disturb what she does. She doesn't want to disturb what I do. And so I do these reviews when she's out somewhere, and that's always in the daytime. And I normally drink my whiskey at night. And so my powers of tasting are not as wide awake now as they would be tonight. Not getting anything more on the nose. It's a floral honey. I can't tell you what kind of flower, but it's not just honey, but it has a flowery sensation to it, or impression. I'm not sure what the correct word would be. I'm not getting a whole lot from this whiskey, and while I do like it and I drink it, and I'll buy some more whenever I want, it isn't the most complex whiskey I've ever had. So I'm getting the honey, I'm getting the spice. There's honey butter in there. If you've never had honey butter, you don't know what you're missing. I grew up with honey butter. You take some honey and mix butter with it, and it improves both. It's one of those things where it's greater than the sum of its parts, or however the saying goes. But we got that in there. There's a little bit of butterscotch, maybe some caramel, typical bourbon notes. Buttered roasting years, and you would expect corn in a bourbon. It has to be at least 51% corn. I don't know what the mash bill on this is, but it will have that 51% corn, if not more. But overall, it's not a bad bourbon. As I say, it's not the best bourbon I've ever had, but it's not a bad bourbon, and I'm growing to like 100 proof or more whiskey. If you're just starting, there's nothing wrong with 80 proof. And I still drink some 80 proof stuff. But I'm getting to like more proof. And part of that is when they proof a whiskey down to, say, 100. It's going to come out of the barrel at 120, 125, sometimes 130 proof. And then they add water to bring it down to bottling proof, to 100 proof in this case. And yes, that dilutes the alcohol. It also can dilute the flavor. And so the higher proof a whiskey is, the more likely you are to get flavor. This is not the most complex whiskey I've had, though. It's good. And if you're looking for a wheated bourbon at 100 proof, and this is a good one to start with, this Rebel 100. And Taste is very subjective, but I like it, and I think you just might like it too.